Great. Well, welcome everybody. We are just about to get started for today's conversation, talking about digital success stories and in sponsorship and looking at audience data. Really excited to have Nick Lawson from Squad join us, as well as Amir Zinazozi from Zoom. Some great experts. Had the opportunity to hear them speak on a number of occasions and chat with them directly, and they're going to bring some fantastic information to today's conversation. I also want to do a bit of housekeeping because we've got a new platform. So we brought on Mindsu as our platform sponsor. Look forward to hearing your engagement with the platform. And there's a couple different pieces to it. So you can engage with the other attendees through the platform, as well as put in your Q&A and chat back and forth. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop those in the Q&A as we go. And looking at our next session on April 7th, we're going to be bringing in Colleen Stewart from Perfect Pitch Pro Consulting Group, talking about storytelling. So really looking at how to craft your story, how to put that in front of brands, how to put that in front of your customers and audiences, and looking at your pitches. So we'll be sending more information about that session and how you can register following today. Really, I think I'm going to pass it off to Amir and Nick to talk about, their different organizations, where they come from sponsorship, and how they plug in. So, Amir, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, sure. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me and considering me on here. So Amir Zinozi, co-founder, president of Zoom, and what we focus on is partnership analytics. So collecting all the different engagements that you're doing across all of social media, understanding what that value is to partners, helping win new partners, helping understand benchmark against other ones, peers and competitors that might be out there in the industry, and it's in sports and esports. But basically, we ingest everything on social from organizations like Squad that are out there working with teams, creating engagement, and we're all parts of the ecosystem: teams, leagues, agencies, and brands, which is a lot of fun. I'll kick it off to Nick to introduce himself, and then let's get into some great discussion here.
Yeah, always excited to jump on with Amir, and thanks so much for having me. I'm Nick. I'm co-founder of a company called Squad. We're really helping sport teams and getting a little bit out of the sports realm now with some new clients, but really be able to prove lower funnel conversion and engagement. So different activations like trivia, scratch and win, prediction games, with the overall goal of adding a digital asset to your portfolio as a sports team that you can go back to a sponsor. This is how many signups we got. This is how many coupons were distributed. So really just adding more digital assets to their portfolio packages to be able to sell that to sponsors and keep them happy and buying and coming back.
Fantastic. And it's certainly been a crazy year for where you both engage when it comes to sports and events. From no sports to events virtually but no fans, and now some hybrid elements of bringing in fans with with a goal eventually. I guess we'll end up with full stadiums. I get pretty jealous looking at Australia and New Zealand and seeing full stands there. But how's that affected where your businesses are coming from?
Yeah, I'll go first, and I think I kind of speak for both of us. I think both our organizations have been really fortunate to guide and be really that solution for teams and leagues and brands to understand, how to move forward in a world where digital is the only safe way to engage with fans. And I'm excited to have fans return back. You watch 538 and some of the stats they put out with fans in and fans out and the impact that fans have towards the gameplay. But it's been a completely different world. And I think, the world is not going to go back to what it was. Digital has come forefront as one of the best ways to engage with fans. And teams have really gotten smart about how they monetize this and how they bring their brands and interact with them, how they show value through these interactions. One thing that we've seen is just a tremendous amount of focus on, providing exposure visibility on those logos. You're seeing this with the tarps in the NFL. You're seeing this on the screens in NBA, dashboards, logos on helmets in NHL. And so, people have gotten really creative. A lot of the different ideas that people have had in the past that previously might have been a little too aggressive or new or just game changing. Everything goes now, and it's exciting to watch all of this come to fruition and really take off. I think it's been fantastic to watch, and we've seen a lot of this engagement happen with sports that previously didn't receive as much exposure in limelight. You're seeing NWHL, you're seeing NWSL, a lot of great women's sports and organizations seeing a lot of engagement in it. And one thing I love to see is just how teams have gotten really creative with how they activate with fans. And Nick, you were saying how you have these like lower funnel activations. I think it'd be interesting to share with the audience that sort of process, because it's super important for these teams and brands to get this first party data to connect with them, because they're not in the fans, right? They're not in the stands, right? They're digitally engaging with you. Your audience digitally is much larger than the audience that's in the stadium. And I think it's important to lay the groundwork of like how you're capturing this information, because data is the only way that we're going to drive this forward and understand how to best engage with our fans. And you're a big reason why a lot of these organizations are getting more data on their audiences.
Yeah, kind of going off what you were saying, shift, a lot of times I see, within sports sponsorship, and I used to do it, I used to sell sports sponsorship, is we really focused in on either the live game or we focused in on in the stadium. And obviously that's a very small window, what we know now of what our entire fan base is. So I'm excited for what I'll call the renaissance within sponsorship of teams we're working with and teams we've just even chatted with are starting to really realize, wow, we have a lot more following than we previously thought. And there's ways that we can include them into this experience through digital means, as opposed to only allowing, people to get the full experience by coming to our stadium or even watching on television, right? Because obviously there's some viewership restrictions there. But as we get into this new world, I hate that term, but this new era, let's call it, of sponsorship, it's your data is going to be really important, meaning understanding who your fan is, having the ability to reach them authentically. Obviously, we don't want to spam them. We want to make sure that whatever sponsorship message or activation we're pulling into them pulls in. And I think the biggest thing, and I've talked about it a little bit on some of the content, is, if we look at the funnel, there's awareness, which obviously our signage, seeing a brand is great, right? Getting logo love, that's at the top of the funnel. Then we're going to go down to engagement. I really want to pull you in. Studies obviously show that if you engage a fan with a sponsor, half court shots, things like that, they remember those logos a lot more. And then the next thing is, let's actually be able to have a data point to where we can hit them to do some sort of action, right? If you are doing an activation, can we get them to a coupon? Can we get them to sign up for something? But I think the key thing here, and the big reason why this data is so important, at least from what we're seeing, is what a lot of other advertising platforms have that sponsorship necessarily doesn't do very efficiently, which is the retarget. When you get somebody's email, obviously you're collecting it, with them agreeing to rules and regulations, opting into, the ability to retarget them. But when you're earning that sort of data piece, you now have a chance to speak to them again with more messaging, and you don't have to wait until that next game day. So I think the biggest piece, the thing that excites me most about kind of looking at this renaissance, this revolution within sponsorship in sports, and this isn't just in sports, this is in all events, is, when a brand comes to you, they're gonna compare your advertising product to some of the other advertising products out there. And Facebook ads do an amazing job at grabbing somebody, engaging them, and then allowing you to create an audience to then re-engage them. If we don't have that in our stack, meaning when a brand is deciding whether to sponsor us or not, if we don't have some of those retargeting pieces, if we don't have, for you all at Zoom, if you don't have an audience breakdown that can tell them that hey, you really should double down on this sponsorship because our fans are 2 times more likely to engage with, this category of sponsor than, normal fan bases out there. That's where, you're really going to be able to do some exciting things, and you're really going to be able to help brands reach their goal. And I think no longer can we, we've all done it. I've done it. We no longer can go into a recap meeting and say, here's some images of your signage or whatever, and here's how many people we had in the stands. The sophistication of the way that brands engage and connect is so much more now, that you actually have to be able to say, here's exactly who we hit. Here is the authentic campaign that we hit them with. Here's the ability for either you or us to retarget them. And our goal is to build a relationship over a long period of time. And I think that's where the data piece comes in so well. And again, if your team doesn't have it, brands are seriously going to consider, should I spend on Facebook ads targeting sports fans, or should I spend on your sponsorship? And I think that's the next revolution that I'm excited for, is we're almost getting into the game with a new asset to where we can really compete with some of these digital options.
It's a big piece. I remember pre-COVID hearing the head of FC Barcelona's partnerships talk about the fact that they've only got 5% of their worldwide fan base that's ever going to be in stadium. So then it's trying to figure out how do they engage all of those other people, because as you're just saying, all their sponsorship engagement was happening in stadium, around stadium. So it's such a big miss, and I think COVID has forced people to start thinking about who are my people in social, who are my people that I have connected digitally, because the fans haven't gone anywhere. And I think about the work that you do, Nick, with all the colleges. You've got the college students, but that alumni base and that alumni following for all those teams is huge. And if you're focused just in stadium, it's going to miss out on so much elements and important data that you're not focused always on the 18 to 22-year-old crowd. All of a sudden, you've got this extended reach, and if you don't have that data, then you can't feed that back to sponsors. Amir,
Brad,
what have you seen, just sort of how people are drawing it in?
Yeah, no, one element that you said there, Brad, before I answer that question, is that you nailed it, right? These audiences are not homogeneous. There's segments of different populations. And, if you're not addressing those different segments in different ways, it's like what Nick was saying, you don't want to span these audiences. What works for me as a parent didn't work for me when I was, single in my early 20s. And, I was trying to go there, find a bar, drink with my friends. Now I'm trying to have a safe, fun experience with my family and my kids. And so we have a little phrase here, focusing on those niche audiences, and niches get riches, right? The more personalized you can make it, the more impactful your marketing is going to be. And one thing that, Nick really eloquently put there is, and you didn't quite say it in this way, but I'll be a little bit more dramatic than you. Brands own the ecosystem, right? At the end of the day, they're on top. What they want is what's going to happen. And what we've seen today is the world that they live in is, okay, COVID's happened. They don't have the budget that they have anymore. There's less people to do what they need to do. They need to be right. They need to show results. They need to have numbers backing up everything that they do. And the harder you make it for them to look at your activation, what you're doing with them in comparison to YouTube ads, Facebook ads, Spotify ads, all the ads, right? The more you can make it easier for them to understand that marketing spend and the impact that it's making, and you put it in the same language that they're doing their sponsorships and comparing everything else to, the better you are as an organization at renewing them and winning new partners because of the success that you're providing with them. So a lot of that is just matching that same language. And so, yeah, if the fans are absolutely there, they're more than ever, right? Because previously everyone had tunnel vision and they were just looking through the scope of the gun of what's inside the stadium. Now it's everything that's outside of scope that everyone's paying attention to. And, the great thing about this is that helps, understand the impact of the reach, the impact of the engagement, understanding where it's coming from. And then one thing that, Nick, that you mentioned is there's a lot of value. You can't just put a picture of the logo, like you said. You can't slap logos on stuff. It's got to resonate. It's got to have a brand recall capability there. But across all of this content, there's tons of exposure that's happening, right? And so, just look at my background, right? There's so many things going on. You can kind of tell that's Coca-Cola because of the branding, but I would say that's a low recall because the quality of the image is very low. That's what we do. We run the AI through everything. We capture everything through the game types, and we help these organizations understand, one, how can you make the partner visibility even more prominent? How do you make the branding visibility even more impactful? And these are things that you need to be doing and thinking about for your partners, because at the end of the day, the strongest relationship is between the fan and the team. It's stronger than most people's religions. The relationship with the religions, people got tattoos on their arms, tattoos, of their logos of their favorite teams and organizations. And so when a brand is validating and saying, hey, this is our sponsor, this is our organization that we're working with, that's a tremendous shortcut in trust validity that these organizations are providing these brands, right? And so being able to showcase this and understand the value of this, because it doesn't come cheap. And at the end of the day, these brands, gone are the days are they here to invest into the sport because they love the sport and they're a sponsor and it's a 10-year deal. They're going to ride the waves with you up and down. That's gone. I'm sorry. It's gone. It's advertising. What have you done for me lately? So you need to be focusing on pulling all of these metrics in and showing these values. And as the fans return, one is different focus on how you engage the fans in the stadium, different focus on how do you capture those insights across, whether it's broadcast, whether it's on Twitch and you're in esports and the different audiences that are interacting and engaging there. But to thrive in this digital space, you honestly need to be focusing on how can I collect as much data as possible to show that I'm providing value in front of my partner, and focus on what their key actions are, whether it's driving traffic to locations, whether it's purchasing a product, whether, all the things that Nick is saying through their activations, capturing the meals, finding ways to engage with them. That is honestly the best way to do it. And what scares me is there's a lot of still old school types of thinking that, digital, might not be as valuable as, some of the in-person and activation and stuff like that. Both are valuable. Both are extremely. They're just different forms of interacting and engaging. And if you're giving away your social media and exposure that you're providing them, you're losing a lot of value that you hold as an organization through your engagement. So I know I kind of went off there. I get a little passionate about this stuff. You might have to tase me at some point, Brad. But I mean, it's really important stuff. And this world is data driven. I mean, gone are the days, like Nick said, it's not going to happen with, I'm a fan of the team. That doesn't cut it anymore. You need to drive results, and they have to be shown in those marketing meetings and drive conversions.
Well, I think that becomes really important when you're looking at the fact that, if you're buying in Google or you're buying in Facebook, you can buy the segment of the fan base that you want, rather than just saying, okay, I'm going to advertise to all 50,000, 70,000 people who are in the stadium. So I mean, you've got some great analytic data that I've seen through Zoom. Where does somebody start? They know they've got the event, or their activity that they've been running. Their data is probably pretty limited. Where do you start coaching?
Yeah, Brad, that's a great question, because there's all different ways of kind of getting involved. One is creating fun and elements and engagement and activations to get people to engage with you on digital, right? So, go to Squad, get them. If you have a casino partner, do the scratch off, do the Dunkin' raise, do all these different types of partner activations that make sense for the partner that you're bringing it in. But it's, have these different types of digital interactions that you're having. Two is, if you don't have an activating, social and creative team, that I got to say, that's your most powerful asset that you can have. Invest in a designer, invest in a video team, invest in a content creation team. There's a reason why, Disney Plus and Peacock and Netflix and all the, Paramount Plus and all these organizations are fighting over, The Office and different shows that are out there. It's because content, it's a digital asset. And I'm not going into NFTs. We won't go there, not today. But all of this is incredibly valuable because engage and attention at the end of the day is currency. So create content is the number one thing I would start with, is create content, whether it's through an activation and it's a fun, engaging way, creating these memories, right? But tracking all of your social posts is just a bar none, right? That's first step. Second step is looking at what kind of action deliverables that you need with your partners, whether it's emails, whether it's they're looking for exposure, whether you need geolocation data if you're driving to a certain location, all those things. You want to make sure that it matters to the partner you're capturing it. And then there's the ability of tracking the exposure. And for surface level of like pulling this content in is you create like a CPM, a CPE, or CPV. And if you're not familiar with these terms, it's a rate for impressions and a rate for engagement and a rate for video views. And across your different platforms, you're going to have different rates. And there's tons of organizations and agencies that can work with you to hone in one. I'm happy to give you numbers that we do default. Just tweet me at Zanozzi. I'll give you if you guys need somewhere to start. But you want to understand what type of engagement that you're generating and what that value is. That is not the same as what the value the brand is receiving. Now, if it's a fully branded post, you could argue that they get the whole value of the social value that you provided in engagement. But if it's an incidental exposure, say it's a 4-minute video and you see the Nike swoosh sign for 4 instances for a total of 20 seconds, you're not going to say they own the whole 20 minutes. And so if you're at that point where you need to understand that value across all your incidental exposures, there's AI tools that are out there like us at Zoom, and there's other ones that you can look at of how you can collect that information and value and aggregate it in total and deliver that. But the main thing is understanding that it's not just the engagement, it's not just interactions. To bring these brands in, there's another element that you have to do that's successful. And this is a trend that we've been seeing, is having these brands give more than just money alone, right? Angel City FC is doing some wonderful things around this. They're donating 10% of all sponsorship towards a good cause that impacts the community. You're seeing a lot of these organizations, like the health organizations, make impact towards what was going on with the pandemic. Bring these brands in to make an impact with the community, because if it's just a transactional sort of relationship, there's going to be a missing element where fans are not going to be fully engaged in interacting with it. I know that's less of like, just quantified numbers, that you're doing. But when you're doing audience analytics and you're seeing what your audiences care about, you need to have that factored into how you want to engage and interact with them. And it's just a part of personalizing it so you get better engagement. I'd ask, Nick, where do you think some of your customers find their best starting point with some of the activations that you provide? Because I'm sure Brad has some ideas too of where you think what someone should start. But it's I think it really ranges on the partner. But is it emails? Is it link clicks? Is it just pure impressions and engagements?
For us, and again, we work but pretty lower funnel, right? Like we're doing a scratch and win that's sending out a coupon because the sponsor cares about coupon redemptions, right? Now let's flip that. If you don't have that top of funnel, if you don't have a captivated audience that you can send this activation out to and they'll actually use it, right? Then my activation, I wouldn't say is meaningless, but it doesn't have as much power to it, right? So, our activation is usually an overall piece to a full package that fully says, look, we're going to do these posts on social. We're going to do, this pieces of signage in our stadium. And to help with the lower funnel, we're going to have this activation, because the reason why we built our product is when I was selling sponsorship, the question started coming up of, hey, how many sales did that get me? And we did what we were taught to do in sponsorship, which is, look, 100,000 people saw this logo. I guarantee you somebody came in, and they're not going to come in and say, I purchased this because of seeing the sign. And that worked for a certain amount of time in my career of selling sponsorship. Eventually, though, Facebook ads came out, and a Facebook ad can tell you how many reached, how many people watched your video, who those people were that clicked through, how many people purchased, and then build an audience based on who clicked, and you can retarget them with they purchased, so let me hit them with another different offer than what they didn't purchase. So I think the big thing there is, as we get started here, it's really important, as you said, to just start with great content. Start with things that your fans are going to care about, behind the scene activations. Don't necessarily put a price point on it for your sponsors yet. I think back to the Winterhawks. The Winterhawks are doing a great activation right now where their head coach is doing 30 drills in 30 days. And he's just going through hockey drills, and they're doing video content. And that content is sponsored by a car partner, but it's the first time they launched that content. So, with that being said, they don't really know the full extent of the results, but it fits in with the car partner's goal, which is they wanted to get into what is, the local youth hockey arena. And obviously coaches and parents and young players are going to be watching those drills. So I think the content, and I struggle with this, and I might throw this back to you, Amir. On the one side, we have sponsors come to teams and say, we're looking for leads. On the flip side, we have teams pushing content, right? And I always struggle with, like, what do you start first? Like, do you take what the sponsor gives you and build a campaign from that? Or do you start with, hey, I know this content is going to resonate, and then try to figure out which sponsor is going to be better for? I can see it both ways, but that's what I struggle with is, hey, a sponsor came to me and a car partner and wants to do some sort of activation. Do I just make an activation for car partners, or should I be more focused on, look, this is what my fans are really going to engage with? I think, coaches shows, things like that. And then how can we authentically add our sponsors into that messaging?
Yeah, no, that's a great point there, Nick. And there's a couple things that you can do. One is, when you're finding new partners, you don't have to start from scratch. Audience analytics should be able to tell you which partners you should be going to. If you win by your fans, the team will win, the partner will win. There's pre-existing relationships. You don't need to recreate the wheel. Terrible pun, but I had to throw it in there. And so that's one element too. And then, so say you got the partner. Say they want to do all these things, right? There's one, you can listen to them, you can work with them, understand what elements that they care about. And I'm sure Brad has a lot of experience with, like, working and finding out what the right way to activate and engage with. But what I'd argue is you want to look at your audience as a team, right? And you want to take the brand's audience and you want to overlap it. This is a very terrible Venn diagram, right? But you want to have that overlap. What does that overlap look like? What is the favorite athlete? What are the other things? Do they care about sustainability? Do they care about recycling? Are they dog lovers? And what are the elements that we can hone in on so that when we create this content, and I'm not going to say the partner's name or the team's name, but there was a car company, they wanted to work with a team. They did a video, it was feature focused, it didn't succeed. They got really low engagement. They redid it, they did the audience analytics the next year around. They found the top athlete between the brand and the teams as far as who they followed the most. They saw it was a dog. They saw there was, like, sustainability. So instead of doing the features, like putting your foot under the trunk to pop it and all that kind of stuff, like look at the review mirror, they said, hey, this player is going on a road trip. He's going to take his dog on a car ride with him to get some errands done. And so the car was featured throughout the entire experience. It was the storyline that moved and through it, they showed some of the features where they went and popped open the trunk when they were at Whole Foods, because that was the number one. It wasn't really Whole Foods. It just looked like Whole Foods. They got a bone for the dog. They went to the park. They saw some trash on the ground. They threw it away. And there was a spokesman from the brand that was sitting in the back seat and kind of engaging and interacting with them. And so you're not going to flat out just say, like, this was made for you, but you're putting little elements in there that the fans can connect with. And so it's content and storytelling that considers the audience that's going to engage and interact with this. So you're optimizing it and you're creating content that will resonate well with that. There's other elements that you can do, and these are little technical things. I'll bring up one example, and this will be my only Canadian reference outside of Brad, Drake, right? So Drake crushes it, right? All his music, everything. But how has his music changed over time? Well, the songs have gotten shorter. the beat comes up much quicker, right? There's more tracks on each album that come out. Why is he doing that? Well, for streaming, right? He's trying to get as many streams in as many places as possible. So he's re-architected his art and craft. He hasn't sacrificed his creativity in any means, but he's optimized it to get as much value as possible for what he puts out. And so sponsorship teams should be thinking about this as well. How do you create great content with great logo exposure? One thing that mind boggles me is like sometimes people put a logo with no color block behind it. That instantly kills the clarity. And you want to always make sure that now we're doing some cool studies, then we kind of nerd out on so how big does the logo get before you decrease the amount of engagement? How does winning impact the value of your content that you provide? Interesting aspect, when there was a pause in live sports, which was terrible. And that was such a boring time in our lives. But thank God, that they all came back and they sacrificed to make all the sports work. But when that happened, teams that usually did not succeed on the field or on the court or on the ice did more value in their content and got more engagement than the teams that historically win all the championships. So without relying on the winning, the teams that have always been creative. So think of your record or your season, it's a marketing element, right? It doesn't, if your team's doing well, it doesn't mean you can't win on behalf of your partner with engaging the audience in the right ways. And so it's, as far as like working at content creation, the data is there. Go with what fans want to see, and you're going to deliver something that's going to be impactful. And that, at the end of the day, it's just everything should be fan driven. And it's a fantastic question that you brought up, Nick. And Brad, you've been asking all the questions. Let's ask you some questions. What are some things that you've seen that you find that whether it's campaigns that have done well during the pandemic or elements of campaigns that before the pandemic? I know you guys do a lot of great work at Sponsor Circle, and you told me, hey, this is for the fan, this is for the audience. We want this to be educational, but I think you do a lot of great work, and I want to highlight you and what you guys are doing. Give us an example of something that you guys did really well.
No, I appreciate you pumping our tires. I think the one piece that you brought up, which and Nick alluded to, is you can buy an audience in Google, you can buy it in Facebook, and it gives you reach. And I sometimes think that just feels like buying a 30-second ad and just putting your logo up and running that for 30 seconds. There's just no relevance to it. So when you start talking about events, teams, whatever activity somebody's engaging with sponsorship, it starts to bring that relevance to it. So as you're walking through the example with the athlete and being in the car, you start bringing that relevance home, that you start to feel like you relate to that individual. And that's where people have seen succeed with their digital content during COVID and pre-COVID, is they started bringing those elements home. So there's been 2 professional rugby teams that have launched in Toronto over the last couple of years. And one of the big pieces they did, they started all this storytelling. So the one team was bringing in how they recruited all their players and how those players, they tried out, what's their background, really creating that backstory. So I think about American Idol or America's Got Talent, and they do that full backstory vignette. They brought that content to each of those players, and that drew in the new audience, and it really created that connection. And I think that's where a lot of people need to start being, thinking about, there's different elements of how they can bring their content to life. So we do work with a big festival in Montreal, been a 400,000 person street festival for years. And last year they couldn't run live. They really had to try and figure out how to reposition themselves and how to bring it to a virtual world. And it was tough trying to bring, how do we turn 400,000 people into 400,000 eyes online? And that's a challenge, to try and bring that audience together. So you've really got to work to bring your digital audience, find partners that can draw that in. And they were fantastic about aligning themselves with some key influencers who became that additional voice for them. And then they took their content and turned it into little vignettes. So things that they would have had on stage, or a cooking experience or a kid's experience, then became video experiences where people could view it, they could engage with the artists live, and it was fantastic. But I think it really, is so important to start figuring out what have you got content that may not cost you that much that you can then create as things that can be pushed out. The fact that Instagram stories, Facebook stories, now they moved it into LinkedIn and TikTok, are all these short, let's do under 10-minute videos. And that's how they're going to start pulling their algorithm in to get you more views. That's a great way to start. You start pushing out your content in that way. And then they can tie into somebody like you, Amir, and start going, okay, now I've got this audience. Who are they and what do they look like? Because I think that's one of the things we haven't really delved into is, the data that you've got at Zoom and being able to say, okay, yes, you've got these 10,000 followers, but here's who else they follow. This is what they look like. And you start getting these demographic backgrounds that I think a lot of organizations don't have access.
No, and that's a really great point, Brad, because one is understanding the fans and what they're looking to do. And then two, it's making sure that there's a recall element that makes sense with the activation to get them to interact and engage with you. That I think you brought up some great examples. One, I spent a year at Virginia Tech. It was a little too country for me at the time. But one campaign that I was a really big fan of is the Steal the Bacon campaign. I think that was one of your products, Nick. And so Smithfield, they're farming their meat. They make great bacon. Look at me, I've had a piece or two, right? And so they brought in Steal the Bacon, and it was on the element of how many steals that are going to happen during the game, right? So steal, bacon, your value, and so like all those elements. The easier you kind of connect the dots, right, to making sure that it makes sense for why someone is associated to this campaign, that's where you really make the recall moments and where you make it just easy for them. You look at steal a base, steal a taco, right? Like really great ways of Taco Bell's done a really great job. There's tons of brands that are doing some amazing activations that are out there, and it's at the end of the day, the game is psychology. I mean, we're talking technology, but all of this is really at the end of the day psychology. How can you connect to that brand recall moment? How can you make things as easy as possible for people to grasp onto it? Because that relationship that these fans have, and I know I keep saying this over and over again, but that really is the oxygen that feeds this entire chat room that we have here, this entire industry that we have. And it's not just sports, right? It's film, it's entertainment, it's music, it's all that stuff, and esports as well. But it's if we're not doing right by that, and if we're not thinking about how to make those connections, again, we said this over and again, you can't just slap a logo on there. And so I love, Brad, that you're taking the time to research and focus on it. I love seeing organizations like Virginia Tech Hokies, work with Nick to make these like custom elements that those little movements make such a bigger connection than you and I can quantify with our data. And we see that over and over again, these people engaging. And when you see that engagement rise over time, when you make it very easy for fans to connect mentally to the idea of the activation that's at play, that's when these things take a life of their own and fans start amplifying what they're doing, and more people interact and engage with it. I'm going to tell like a really quick story. I wasn't even affiliated with this in any way whatsoever, but it's just such a powerful story, and I'll be really quick with it. But DHL, right? So they're the delivery company, like kind of like FedEx and UPS and stuff like that. They probably don't appreciate me doing that, but anyway, so they were investing into this esports tournament. I won't name who, right? And so they wanted to do this engagement. Esports is very different than traditional sports. If you treat them the same, you're going to lose, right? It's just from the very get-go. You got to treat them with a certain level of respect. You got to show that the high five handshake as you come in, right? All the behaviors that this audience is going to want to see with the content and creation. And so what they did was they created a video for this tournament, and they brought in one of the top Dota 2 players. Right. So it was a Dota tournament. They brought a retired athlete or streamer, whatever you want to call it in esports. And he's super successful, people's champion. And they put him in the outfit. And then he went and delivered loot boxes. So they even make sure the frame was a gaming reference of what he was delivering. So he was giving away presents, gifts, swag bags, all this kind of stuff to fans at the tournament. And so that was super successful. So successful that they brought an element of him into the Dota 2 game with the DHL branding as a component of it, and DHL became a partner of it, but the fans were loving it. And so at the end of the tournament, when they were, the presenting sponsors and they were going through, it was like Mercedes, Honda. And when they went to DHL, the crowd started chanting DHL, 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 which is, that is brand nirvana. If you can achieve that type of, activation and engagement, but they did all the elements that we're talking about. And we're not affiliated with any of this. I don't think any of us was working with DHL on that, but like, that's the recipe for success. It's do the data, do the research, activate and make sense based on the community that you're trying to get in front of. Know to handshake, right? Every time I see those NBA players doing that, I'm like, man, that's a connection, right? And we see that, and you have to have that with your audience to really win at this game. So at the end of the day, if you walk away with anything, it's just do your research, do right by your fans, and you will do well.
Can I caveat? I'm going to go a little dark here, and Amir's heard this from me as well.
Let's do it.
We're talking about building an audience, right? Which is, let's look at the internet today. The internet is driven off of building audiences. That's all it is. Whether it's social, whether it's the early days of blogs, whether it's online publications. My biggest worry in all of sponsorship is that we have an assumption that because we are the official account of a team, event, or organization, that we own that audience. Your audience can absolutely be pirated if you are not doing these things of creating that engagement, doing more than just doing tweet updates that are just your score, right? And it's happening. There are so many influencers out there that are making money by going into the parking lot before a game and filming the tailgate, building a bigger YouTube audience than the team has, and then selling that to a brand through YouTube ads. And that I think is the biggest thing of, we're talking about, hey, you need to build these stories, you need to build this community. In all honesty, in sports, that's the entire game right now. Is your community as engaged as you think it is? And if you don't know the answer to that question, you need to do some things with data, you need to do some things with test campaigns and figure that out. Because in all honesty, I think we bring that idea is not thought about enough. And I think we're higher than we think on that engagement piece. And we assume a lot that because it's coming from the team account, therefore it has a better connection than somebody else would. And that's just not the case. And what's happening in sponsorship is brands are really going to start considering sponsoring other ways to reach your fans if you can't prove that you are the best way to reach their community for whatever you're selling. And it scares me. Like literally, as someone who works on both sides, I'm talking with brands, I'm talking with sponsor or teams. Like the number one thing that scares me in the industry today is we assume because we have that verified check that we own this community. And to be honest, we don't. There are teams out there that think they have more sway over their fan bases than they do. And I think what a lot of these data analytics things do is, anybody can get more YouTube subscriptions than you as a team if they know the process in the analytics, right? If they know exactly what they need to produce at the right time, they can beat you at your own game unless you start taking some of these things into effect. So I think, I didn't want to go dark there too much, but I think, as we talk about the importance, that's why it's important, because it's so much harder to catch up than it is to do the right things the first time and build that audience. And when you say that DHL example, the first thing that went to my head was, I wonder if they could have done this through an outside esports influencer and had the same success. And the reason why that way is because, in all honesty, as we're talking with some of these brands, this is what's going through their head when they're deciding whether to actually sponsor you or somebody else. These are the things that are going through their head of, hey, are you really the best way to reach your fans? Which is insane to think of, right? Like, it's insane to think that maybe the sports team or organ is not the best way to reach that demographic or that fan base or that community. But that's something that I think about daily. And I think every organization should really have that hard conversation with themselves on the sponsorship side, on the marketing side, to say, look, can we actually prove to a brand that we are the best way to reach this fan base compared to other options? And if you can't solidify and say that with conviction backed by data, in the next 5 years, you're going to lose your sponsors, because either somebody's going to create the content that's better than yours that they'll sponsor, or in all honesty, brands are just going to go direct and make their own content and not use your official marks, but everybody's going to know what they're talking about.
You know, the metaphor
sometimes you just
I'd
need
have
to know where
use.
your audience is. You just, I think working, you look at where are all your digital followers, where are your social followers, and if you're spending all your time creating YouTube content and you've got 300 followers there, but you've got 15,000 followers on Facebook, maybe you should be doing video on Facebook, because that's where you're going to get that growth. And I think people miss that, and it becomes a big challenge. I was just, as we were talking about the dark side and people pirating your audience, I heard a story about South by Southwest about 10 years ago, where they had Mark Zuckerberg come on, and he was being softball interviewed, and everybody in the stands or in the audience started having a full Twitter conversation, and they were challenging everything that Zuckerberg was talking about. And all of a sudden, South by Southwest lost control of the event because everybody was talking about it at a different forum. So it becomes really interesting to try and figure out, okay, where's your audience sitting, and making sure you're getting that communication out. Because you're right, it's, what's the value of those people if you say that they're on YouTube and you're charging a price for YouTube, but really they're somewhere else, then how are you providing that value to the sponsor that they couldn't have just bought otherwise?
And I think the second thing of that, sorry, Mir, not to cut you off, but there's one crazy story. So like on our podcast, I work with Rich over at the Winterhawks a lot. We interviewed a young fan who's 17. And like, I do this all the time for young people because I want to know where their focus is. And we asked them, hey, where do you consume most of the content for this sports team? And he said, well, Twitter and Instagram. But that's the wrong question to ask. The correct question is, what social media app do you spend the most time on? And his answer was Snapchat. Unequivocally, hands down, I'm on Snapchat. I'm on it for 4 hours a day. It's literally my life. That piece of information immediately tells me, okay, if this team is not putting content on Snapchat, if I'm the first person to do it, I probably can build a better relationship with this group of fans on this platform, right? So I think, to your point, 100%, it's not just, a lot of times, again, chatting with people who work with teams, it's, hey, Twitter is our #1 platform in which we reach fans. Well, if you're not having a relationship with your fan base on Snapchat, and it's one of the larger social media platforms, you're missing out on a huge opportunity. And when you notice that, that's when somebody comes in and pirates it. That's when somebody says, you know what, there's not a lot of content going on here for this team on Snapchat. Why don't I do it? Why don't I be the person that does it? And then eventually, honestly, if you build a big enough following, that team has to they either have to pay you to reach those fans, or they have to flat out buy you. And I think that's going to be more of a commonplace. And that's the question, as you're having conversations with people who are your fans, is not asking the questions of where do you consume this team's content the most? It's, no, where are you consuming? Because that's going to open up a gigantic opportunity for you to really reach them where they're spending most of their hours. And I'll let Amir jump in because I cut him off for a second time here.
To talk about, the perfect metaphor for this is Snapchat stories, right? Are you building a product or are you building a feature? And so Instagram successfully stole that feature, right? And they activated on it and they got their audience and they were able to make that move. But then LinkedIn, and maybe Fleets, no offense, I love Twitter, but it's LinkedIn story is just like, what the hell is going on, right? So they tried to replicate it and they sucked at it, right? So it's just, you can't always replicate it. And I love what the story that Brad, that you were saying there, because one example of a team that's doing really well on the digital side is Washington football, right? Because a lot of times in the NFL, and I love the NFL and I love the clubs, they would want to host a lot of their videos on their website. Cool. That's not where fans are. Fans are on YouTube. Fans are on there. Fans are on social. It's going to where they are, and so I think that's the theme of what. And correct me if I'm reading it wrong from what you guys are saying, is like you need to be where your fans are. It's not where you are and you want your fans to come. The game, the flip, the script has flipped, right? You need to be where they are. You need to create bite-sized content. You need to talk like they do, right? You need to keep it real. If you're not keeping it real, they will eat you alive. Just like you said on Sponsor Circle. As far as South by Southwest, right? They will overtake the conversation. That's what you're seeing happen on social when people pretend like it was a win even though it was a loss, or like we'll come back and we'll do better. It's just you got to keep it authentic, and you got to understand, like, are you building a feature or are you building a product? And if you're building a feature, other people will steal it. If you're building a product, you're doing the due time and listening to your customer or your fan, and you're giving elements that speak specifically to them. The last thing I'll kind of say on this topic is, it's not the quality, it's not the quantity of the fan base, it's looking at the quality. So every brand has their own target audience. Not every fan fits that bill, with every organization. So when you're a brand and you're looking at which audiences that you should be working with, or which athletes you should be, sponsoring and interacting with, it's not about the size of their following. It's not about that. It's about how many people within their audience match your target audience that you can interact and engage with. Who are those tangential audience members that are not a fan of yours yet that you can be in front of and get them? Sometimes they're not in that audience, but there is a lookalike audience that's in there that you want to get in front of. Because a lot of these cities, whether you're in Toronto or LA or New York, there's a lot of properties out there, but every audience has its own story to tell. And so again, the theme of the day that I have to keep hammering in is do the research that's needed to understand who is in your audience. And it's not who, it's whom, right? There's multiple groups, but if you do it right, you will succeed and you'll engage. And other people that will try to copycat and get in there, they won't have as much success because you're doing right by them. And there's a deeper connection there because you did the research and why they come, why they engage, why they interact. That story that you were saying, Nick, about doing that, interviewing that one 17-year-old, it's, every organization needs to be taking this time and effort to better understand whether you want to do survey, whether you want to do audience social behavior data that's out there. You don't need, there's so many options that are out there, but you got to do the homework. And if you do the homework right, you'll find ways to connect that can't be replicated.
Perfect. Yeah, we've love to get a couple questions in that we've got from the audience here. And I know, Nick, you've got a great calculator on the Squad website that you can compare what the audiences look like and what they charge for the different social elements. How do you reflect that into evaluation when it comes to a digital sponsorship piece?
Yeah, I think, Amir is going to have probably a better, more eloquent answer than I am on this. But, for us, the reason why I made that calculator was we started seeing teams give away their social media, just tweets for free in order to sell signage. And it blew me away because it's so valuable. So we wanted to put it into a piece that said, look, technically you're an influencer. You have a community, brands are paying you to reach that community. I mean, technically, sports teams are some of the earliest and first, most powerful influencers. Brands are paying these influencers this much per post based on their following. And again, it's pretty general. I get a lot of questions on what if your engagement is higher? Obviously, you're going to charge more. But I just wanted to have a baseline to let teams know, hey, like, you shouldn't be giving this away. And honestly, you should be spending a lot. And I get a lot of feedback from people who will message me and saying, you're telling me that I should be charging $100,000 for a season's worth of Facebook posts. And my answer is not that you shouldn't be charging. Influencers who have a similar following are charging that. Not that you should be. They are charging that. You're literally losing dollars because you're devaluing that. So I think there's two mechanisms. One is looking at how influencers are charging. It varies per category, so you can change those metrics. I just did a pretty baseline piece there. But then again, there's another piece to this, which is, looking at your digital activations and looking at just some of ours. I mean, honestly, car partners pay way more than QSR partners for these activations that we offer. And it's because a lead to a car partner is worth way more than, let's say, a coupon for a QSR partner. So a lot of that comes into understanding what's the sponsor's goal and how valuable is that to them. And then you can understand that piece. The last thing I'll say is you can do research to understand if a brand is running Facebook ads. If a brand is running Facebook ads, that means they believe in Facebook. Therefore, if you go to them and say, look, we're going to charge you pretty much market rate for what you would spend on an influencer for our stuff, they're going to get it. They're going to say, yes, totally get it. That's part of doing business. If you go to a brand that's never run a Facebook ad in their life and maybe don't even have a Facebook page, going to them and saying, hey, we're going to charge you $1,500 per post, they might be like, that's insane, because they don't kind of understand that world because they haven't spent in that world. So what I would say is, first and foremost, never give your digital away. I don't care how many millions in signs, you'll never get that value back. The second is look at influencers and how much they're charging. And then the third is just context. There's going to be some places where you fit this sponsor's goal so specifically that you can charge a premium because it fits so well. And you can understand, hey, if you're spending on Facebook, you understand that if I can prove that I can get you leads, you're going to pay this much for it. So I think that's the big piece on those is really don't undervalue your social media assets, your digital assets, anything like that. It's happening too much. And again, that's why we made the calculator, to just give you a baseline to say, look, you should be charging a lot more. And some people will pay it, some people won't, but you're leaving a ton of money on the table by not doing that.
No, it's important to know. And looking at just another question here, and I can address a little bit of it. Thinking about just virtual events, people getting exhausted from it, Zoom fatigue. I think there's some crystal ball looking elements to it, but specifically there, ask some of the questions looking at engaging an arts festival around it and what they can do in a digital piece. And I will recommend the first thing you do is look at the Vancouver Mural Festival, what they did last year. Through COVID, not being able to actually get together and have people there, they developed an app and spread their murals all across the city, and people were using it basically as a treasure hunt going around the city to go and take a look at that. So they had fantastic engagement. But I think as a sort of a wrap-up crystal ball piece, Nick and Amir, do you see people getting fatigued? Do you see the world changing, or is this going to be something that's going to continue going on?
So I'll go first here. I mean, I don't know if we can 100% predict what's going to happen and how different people are going to be engaging. I can tell you that it's going to be constantly changing, right? It's you've got to reinvent how you're doing, how you're engaging, and at the end of the day, it's the value that you provide. If there's entertainment or there's usability, I mean, those are really the two things that we look at. We try to look at, all the different elements of a sponsorship. And I know this is away from live events, but like what performs the best. At the end of the day, it's great content. And so, people say like, oh, man, it's got to be 2-minute video and all that kind of stuff, short attention spans. But then you can see people go through an entire season of Netflix and binge, hours and hours of content. And at the end of the day, it's just, are you providing something that's people are able to learn from, or people are able to be entertained from? So in our business, it's entertainment, right? And so if you can provide that in a sort of way where you can keep them engaged in interacting, there's competition against everything. I mean, your thumb is constantly going through everything that's in front of you, and there's tons of noise. This is not going away anywhere. I mean, everything is going to be, the world is, people are looking at everything through their phones these days. So whether, it's in person or not, at the end of the day, they're always going to have their phone with them. They're always going to be interacting. They're always going to be talking on social and connecting with one another. The key thing is people want to connect, and the way that you do it is just based on keeping things entertaining and engaging, and they'll tune in digitally and remotely if they need to. More people always are watching at a larger audience size and people at the event, but you can never take away the excitement and the energy levels of being at an event as well. So I think you have to plan for both. And I know that's not the answer you want to hear, but it's it's just the way it is. You gotta create, this is something that we think about internally. You got to create content that meets every type of audience member. So it's not going to be one certain person that's going to consume everything that you do. Someone wants to read something, someone wants to watch a video, someone wants to be in person. You just got to create for every type of user that's out there. So if you can figure out how to create more content, whether it's in person and in digital, and make a value to it, then you're in a good spot. If you can't figure that out, the world will let you know.
Yeah, I think just going off that, it's becoming more efficient at putting out great content is the name of the game, right? If it's not so much, oh my gosh, we have to add something for Facebook, we have to add something for Instagram and Snapchat. If you can take your live event and then efficiently put the key pieces and parts out based on different demographics, that's how you'll win. And I always go back to my favorite statistic here in America is that 85% of people say that they want to live a healthier life. Well, of course, 85% of people are going to tell you they want to live a happier life. I don't know what's happening for the rest of that percent that doesn't want to live a healthier life. Maybe they are living that. But, what fans are telling you that they're getting digital fatigue, to me is insane. Because to your point, Amir, we're watching 9 hours on Netflix at home, right? We have no problem with that if it's a good show. People are not, pre-pandemic, Marshmallow did a show on, I think it was Fortnite, and got some of the largest interaction and engagement. That doesn't mean people aren't going to go to Marshmallow shows when he does them live. So I think as much as people are telling us they have Zoom fatigue, every generation that comes after will have lived more and more in this digital world. So I think, that doesn't mean get rid of physical events, but it does mean that as much as people are like, hey, I'm getting Zoom, I'm getting this digital fatigue, everything's digital. It's what we've grown up in. It's what we do anyways. People are just saying that, right? I think you really need to test that. I think what you really need to do is say, for my audience, we do have some live stuff, but I also want to bring in some digital stuff. If nobody does this digital stuff after our live events come back, then we know that, hey, they were correct. They are having digital fatigue. If you find out that most people want to do it digitally as compared to live, you either have to make your live experience more, advantageous for the person to come to, which technically is your content, or you have to have a real conversation with yourself to say, hey, do I really want to, is live event really a big piece of my puzzle anymore? Do we need to make that bigger shift? So I think, to your point, Amir, we are very digitally based. I would create content for both sides, make sure it's good, become really efficient for both live and on digital, and then really let the fans decide, right? Like, let your community decide how they better want to consume. My biggest fear in the sports business is, for the last year and a half, we have trained our fans to watch from home comfortably, and even taught them how to order DoorDash to their home in order to get food. We've now trained them to do that. Of course, there's going to be a boom of sports coming back and fans wanting to be back in the stadium. And, you can't discount, it's not Oracle anymore for the Warriors. I'm a Warriors fan growing up in the Bay Area, but, you can't recreate Oracle, right? But heck, I haven't been to a Warriors game in 3 years because I'm here in Portland. I think the bigger question as we move forward is, humans are very habitual creatures. We've just trained you for about a year to do nothing but sit at home and watch sports. I think after that first boom, we're going to have to get very creative to convince you to overpay for food, try to find parking, pay extremely high rates of and by the way, have you be hit with sponsorship messages during every break that have nothing to do with you, right? I think moving forward, that's the question we need to answer is, if we aren't going to go, we just went all digital. If we aren't going to continue that, we need to really think about our live events and how we bridge that gap to get them back. I mean, for me personally, as somebody who works in sports, it's going to be really hard to get me to pay $40 for parking to secure a spot and $20 for a hot dog and a soda. And at a game where Blazers fans are heckling me because I'm a Warriors fan, and I can just watch from home and, be on social and texting my friends about games. So I think that's something that I think moving forward, organizations need to think about overall, right? If you are putting on virtual festivals and you really need to understand that you're going to have some sort of mechanism to consider getting them back in.
Yeah, and I also think we're just kind of wrapping things up that there is an element that you also need to think about the fact that if your event's only 3 days, you've now created this digital asset that you can impact your fans for an ongoing basis. So you've got the opportunity to connect with them off season, bring them content throughout the year, and really lead up to that live event. So you can almost use it as a teaser to start driving people to come to the live event. I think one of the biggest things in Toronto every year is TIFF, so the Toronto International Film Festival. People pay huge money to go to the premiere, to see the different actors and the director talk about the event. Well, there's no reason why I think some of that couldn't be brought into a digital atmosphere and expand your audience, but it is trying to create that balance. But I think it's been a fantastic conversation. We'll have to figure out doing a part 2 at some point with you guys, because I know there's so much to cover, and you guys are so well versed in the atmosphere. And there's a lot of questions we didn't get to. Thanks everybody for sending those in advance. I will sort of throw it out there. I know Amir and Nick are always really responsive on email. That I'll put the connection in the follow-up email, and if you want to email myself, Nick, or Amir with your questions, happy to engage with you. Again, thanks guys for being part of this, and everybody. Our next session will be with Colleen Stewart, talking about storytelling, crafting your pitch, and really getting to know how you position yourself in front of your audience, or as a brand in front of your sponsored audience. So that's April 7th, and we'll be sending out the registration for that shortly. And I will hand off the last thank yous and welcomes to Amir and Nick. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your attention.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. As you can see, Amir and I can talk about sponsorship for 5 hours straight. So appreciate everybody tuning in and kind of having us go back and forth.
Likewise.
Awesome. So thanks so much, guys. It's been great having you here.
Thank you.
Thank you.